My name is Ruby Cole. I am 32 years old, and I live in a quiet apartment in the city. The night everything changed began with the sound of crystal glasses clinking together, a sound that usually meant celebration. But to me, standing near the wall with a tray of empty drinks in my hands, it sounded like a warning. My sister Evelyn stood in the center of the room, glowing in her white dress, surrounded by lights, flowers, champagne, and people who had come to celebrate her engagement. Everyone was looking at her. That was normal. Everyone always looked at Evelyn. I was near the edge of the room, exactly where my family expected me to be. I was the background character, the shadow, the useful one who made sure things were handled without ever needing to be noticed. Then Evelyn waved me over. The spotlight seemed to hit my face all at once, and my stomach tightened. She smiled at her wealthy new friends and announced loudly that I was her little sister Ruby. Then she told them I worked at the courthouse, answering phones, filing papers, doing admin stuff. The guests laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound, even if most of them did not understand why it hurt. I did what I had always done. I said nothing. I forced a tight smile and looked down at my shoes, because it had always been easier to let them think I was nothing than to cause a scene. But one person was not laughing. Daniel Evelyn's fiancé was staring at me. He did not look amused. He looked terrified. His face went completely pale. He stepped forward, ignoring Evelyn, and the room slowly went quiet. Then he looked straight at me and said, "Wait, you're the judge." To understand why those words shattered my entire family, you have to understand the box I had lived inside for most of my life. It was a box built by my mother, painted by my father, and locked tight by my sister. The label on the box was simple: Ruby. Inside that box, the rules were even simpler. I was the quiet one. I was the plain one. I was the steady, reliable, boring one. That was my role, and in my family, roles mattered. Every family has roles, like a play or a movie. There is the star, the villain, the comic relief, the one everyone worries about, the one everyone praises. In my family, Evelyn was the star. From the moment she could walk, she demanded applause. If she drew a picture, it was treated like a masterpiece that had to be framed. If she sang a song, everyone had to stop eating dinner and listen. She was bright, loud, colorful, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. She sucked all the air out of every room she entered, and my parents were happy to give it to her. Then there was me. I was just Ruby. If Evelyn was the firework, I was the ground she stood on to launch herself. Necessary, maybe, but invisible. No one looks at the ground when there is an explosion in the sky. When we were children, the dynamic settled into stone before I was old enough to challenge it. If I brought home an A on my report card, my mother would smile vaguely and say, "That's nice, honey." Then she would turn immediately to Evelyn and ask about her dance recital, or her solo, or some small victory that apparently mattered more because it sparkled. I learned very quickly that my achievements did not matter in that house. They did not have enough shine. They did not make good dinner conversation, so I stopped sharing them. I learned to be quiet. I learned to blend into the wallpaper. It felt safer that way. If I did not ask for attention, I could not be rejected. That pattern followed us into adulthood. The gap between us only grew wider. Evelyn went into marketing, which suited her perfectly. Her world was built on image flash confidence and talking loudly enough to make people believe whatever story she wanted to sell. She was good at it. She made good money, wore expensive clothes, and dated handsome men who looked like they belonged in catalogs. I went into law, but at first I barely told anyone. When I was in college, I said I was studying justice. My father nodded and went back to his newspaper. He did not ask what that meant. He probably assumed I wanted to be a police officer or a social worker. Since he did not ask, I did not elaborate. When I got into law school, I did not tell them the whole truth either. I was living at home for my first year to save money, and I studied late at night in my bedroom with the door locked and a towel shoved under the crack so the light would not show. I read thick, heavy books about contracts, torts, constitutional rights, procedure, evidence, and precedent. My brain felt like it was on fire. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I loved those cases because they made sense in a way my family never did. In the law, facts mattered. In the law, everyone got a turn to speak. In the law, the truth had a way of coming out eventually. My family thought I was just reading boring books. My mother would knock on my door and tell me to stop reading and come help Evelyn choose an outfit for a date. I would close my book on civil procedure, walk out of my room, and tell Evelyn that the blue dress looked better than the red one. I played my part. When I graduated from law school, my family came to the ceremony, but it was a hot day, and Evelyn had a headache. She complained about the sun the entire time, and my parents were so worried about her hydration that they missed the moment I walked across the stage. My mother was fanning Evelyn with the program while my name was called. I remember standing there with my diploma in my hands, looking toward the seats where they were supposed to be watching me. It hurt. It felt like a sharp stone lodged in my chest. But I swallowed the pain. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I had done it for me, not for them. Then came the job. I started at the courthouse. It was a grind from the beginning. Long hours, piles of paperwork, high pressure, difficult people, impossible deadlines, and cases that followed me home even when I tried to sleep. I loved it. I loved the order of it. I loved the seriousness of it. About a month after I started, my father asked at dinner what I did down at the city building. I opened my mouth to say that I was an attorney working in the prosecutor's office, but before I could answer, Evelyn laughed while scrolling on her phone. She told him I was an admin filing papers, answering phones, helping the important people stay organized. She said it was perfect for me because I loved organizing things. My father nodded, satisfied with that answer. He said it sounded stable and had good benefits. I looked at Evelyn. She was not even trying to be especially mean in that moment. She genuinely believed that was the only thing I could be. In her mind, I was not smart enough, or bold enough, or charismatic enough to be a lawyer. I was just Ruby, the helper, the useful one, the quiet one. I could have corrected her. I could have put my hand on the table and said, "No, I am an attorney. I argue cases in court." But I did not. I looked at my mother serving pie, my father half watching the news on the television in the corner, and Evelyn already texting someone else. I realized correcting them would take energy I did not have. I would have to prove myself. They would ask questions not because they cared, but because they doubted me. They would look at me like I was exaggerating or lying. So I lowered my eyes and said it was stable. That was the lie that sealed the box. From that day on, I became the courthouse girl, the admin, the secretary. Years passed, and I worked harder than anyone I knew. I stayed late. I took on the difficult cases. I built a reputation not as a flash in the pan, but as a hammer. I was relentless. I was fair. I was smart. My colleagues respected me. When I walked into a courtroom, people stood. Lawyers checked their notes more carefully when they saw me at the opposing counsel table. I had power. I had a voice that rang clear and steady in high-ceilinged rooms where truth and consequence mattered. But on Sunday nights, when I went to my parents' house for dinner, I turned back into a mouse. "Ruby, refill the water." "Ruby, did you hear about Evelyn's promotion?" "Ruby, you look tired. Is all that filing getting to be too much?" I lived a double life. In one life, I was a force of nature. In the other, I was a piece of furniture. Then, the biggest moment of my career happened. A seat opened on the bench. It was rare for someone my age to even be considered, but my record was spotless. The judges knew me. They knew I read every page of every brief. They knew I was serious, prepared, careful, and fair. The vetting process was grueling. Interviews, background checks committees, questions about my temperament, my rulings, my legal philosophy, my past, my judgment. I did not tell my family a single thing. Why would I? They thought I answered phones. How do you explain to people who think you answer phones that you are about to become a superior court judge? When I got the call, I cried. I sat in my office, surrounded by my so-called boring books, and wept into my hands. I had done it. I was Judge Ruby Cole. For a moment, I wanted to call my mother. I picked up the phone 3 times, and each time I heard her voice in my head saying, "That's nice, honey, but guess what Evelyn did today?" So I put the phone down. I decided I would tell them when the time was right, when they were actually listening, when there was room in the conversation for me. But that moment never came. There was only one person who sensed that something was different. My cousin, Lily. Lily was considered the black sheep of the family because she had moved to Europe to become an artist and only came back for holidays. Last Thanksgiving, Lily found me in the kitchen washing dishes while everyone else watched football. She leaned against the counter and watched me scrub a pot. Then she said I was different. I looked at her startled and asked what she meant. She told me I held myself differently now, that I walked like I owned the place. But the second my mother or Aunt Susan came in, I shrank. She asked why I did that. I shrugged and scrubbed harder. I told her it was easier. She said it looked painful. She said I was hiding something huge, that she could feel it, that I was like a superhero with a secret identity, except I never took off the glasses. I told her it was just a job. She told me it was not just a job. She said, I see you, Ruby, even if they don't. I almost told her then. I almost broke. But Evelyn burst into the kitchen asking for ice because Daniel loved his drinks cold and there was not enough. I looked at Lily. Then I looked at Evelyn. I said I would go get it. Lily shook her head sadly as I grabbed my keys. That was the dynamic. That was the box. I was a judge who could sentence a man to 20 years in prison, but I was also the girl sent to fetch ice because the star needed it. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I did not need their validation. But deep down, a quiet anger was building. It was a slow-burning fire fed by every interruption, every dismissal, every assumption that I was nothing more than the role they had assigned me. I was waiting for the lid of that box to crack open. I just did not know I would be the one to blow it off. The dismissal was not a one-time event. It was a rhythm, the background music of my entire existence. It happened in small beats and loud crashes over and over again until I learned to dance to it perfectly. Family gatherings were the worst. I used to dread them days in advance. I would wake up with a pit in my stomach on Christmas morning, birthdays, barbecues, and anniversaries because I already knew the script. We had all memorized it. No matter how hard I tried to improvise, the other actors forced me back into my lines. My line was silence. I remember one barbecue last July especially well. It was a hot, sticky afternoon, and we were all sitting on the patio. My parents were there, along with Evelyn, Daniel, Aunt Susan, Uncle Bob, and a few other relatives. Everyone had a burger or a hot dog, and the conversation was loud and fast. Evelyn was holding court, telling a dramatic story about a crisis at her marketing firm. A client had called her at midnight, apparently furious, because the shade of blue in a logo was too sad. Evelyn said she had to wake up her entire team, get the graphic designer on Zoom, and spend 4 hours finding a happier blue. She called it a nightmare and said she had saved the account single-handedly. Everyone gasped. Aunt Susan told her she worked so hard. My mother beamed and said Evelyn had such a gift with people that most people would have quit, but Evelyn had tenacity. I sat there, eating potato salad, wanting to scream. Tenacity over a blue logo. Earlier that same week, I had presided over a custody hearing that lasted 3 days. It was heartbreaking. I had to decide whether 2 children should be removed from their mother's care because of neglect. I listened to testimony that made my blood run cold. I had to remain steady. I had to weigh the evidence carefully. I had to make a decision that would alter the course of 4 lives forever. When I brought down my gavel, my hand did not shake, but my heart was pounding. It took hours for me to calm down afterward. Sitting at that barbecue, I felt a sudden urge to share. I wanted them to know I had a hard week too. I said it quietly at first. No one heard me. Evelyn was still laughing about the blue logo. So I said it again, a little louder. The table went quiet, but it was not an interested silence. It was a polite, impatient pause, like they had pressed pause on a movie only because someone had to leave the room. My father asked if the copier had broken again. A few people chuckled. I felt heat rise in my cheeks and said, no, actually, I had a really difficult case. A custody battle. Very emotional. I started to explain about the mother, but my mother interrupted me. She reached across the table and asked me to pass the ketchup because Uncle Bob's burger was dry. I stopped with my mouth still open. She wiggled her fingers and repeated that she needed the ketchup. So I picked up the bottle and passed it to her. She thanked me and immediately turned back to Evelyn to ask whether the client liked the new blue. Just like that, I was erased. The custody battle, the weeping mother, the terrified children, the weight of the law, all of it was shoved aside for ketchup and a story about a logo. I looked down at my plate and felt the familiar burning behind my eyes, the sting of tears I refused to shed. That was what happened when I spoke. Eyes wandered, my aunt checked her watch, my father tapped his fork against the table, a nervous habit that meant he was bored. Evelyn picked at her nails or checked a reflection in her phone screen. I do not think they always did it to be cruel. They did it because they had decided years earlier that I had nothing interesting to say. They had decided my life was small, simple, and flat. Why would they listen to the admin girl talk about legal procedures? It did not fit the character they had cast me as. So I stopped trying. I built a fortress of silence around myself. I sat through family dinners and observed. I became an expert watcher. I noticed how my mother always refilled Evelyn's wineglass before her own. I noticed how my father laughed at Evelyn's jokes, even when they were not funny. I noticed how Evelyn used all the oxygen in the room, and how everyone else seemed happy to breathe in her fumes. Meanwhile, my real life, my shadow career, was exploding. I received awards. I was named Judge of the Year by the local bar association. I had a plaque on my office wall, a heavy oak desk, chambers of my own, and bailiffs who would take a bullet for me. I remember one afternoon leaving the courthouse in my black robe, walking down the hallway toward my chambers, when a young lawyer stopped me. She was shaking. She called me Your Honor and thanked me. She said the way I handled a ruling had inspired her, and that I was the kind of judge she wanted to be one day. I smiled and told her that meant a lot. I felt 10 feet tall. I felt respected. I felt seen. 30 minutes later, I was driving to my parents' house for my father's birthday dinner. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the robe disappeared. The Your Honor disappeared. My mother yelled from the kitchen that I was late and the trash was overflowing. She told me to take it out before the guests arrived because it smelled awful. I did not argue. I did not say I had just inspired a young lawyer. I did not say I was a pillar of the justice system. I put down my purse, walked into the kitchen, tied up the garbage bag, and dragged it to the curb. It was heavy and smelled like old onions. I stood on the street under the suburban evening light and looked at my hands. These hands signed warrants. These hands held the fate of defendants, victims, families, and children. These hands were currently covered in trash juice. The transition was so sharp it gave me emotional whiplash. I often wondered why I kept going back. Why did I subject myself to that? Why did I not simply stop showing up? I think part of me was still hoping they would figure it out. I wanted them to see me without forcing me to scream. I wanted my mother to look at me one day and say, I looked tired, but in a good way, like I had been doing something important. I wanted them to look past the label they had slapped on my forehead. But they never did. They were comfortable. The dynamic worked for them. Evelyn was the star, and I was the staff. If I changed, the whole system would be disrupted. If I was important, Evelyn might be less important. If I was powerful, my father's dismissiveness might look like foolishness. It was easier for them to keep me small. And for a long time, I helped them do it. I nodded while they explained basic politics to me, even though I knew the Constitution better than they knew their own addresses. I let them explain how loans worked, even though I ruled on bankruptcy cases. I let them treat me like a child. But pressure was building. You can only compress a person so much before they explode. You can only ignore a judge for so long before she brings down the gavel. I did not know the explosion would come at Evelyn's engagement party. I thought it would be just another night of holding drinks, fixing other people's problems, and fake smiling until my cheeks hurt. I thought I could survive one more night in the box. I was wrong. Evelyn's engagement party was not just a party. It was a production. It was held at a private estate overlooking the river. The gardens were manicured perfectly. Thousands of string lights glowed above the lawn like captured fireflies. Waiters in white tuxedos carried silver trays. A string quartet played soft classical versions of pop songs. Everything was white gold and pale pink. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was pure Evelyn. I arrived 20 minutes early because I knew better than to arrive on time. In my family, arriving on time meant I was late for my duties. I parked my modest sedan between a Porsche and a vintage Jaguar and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wore a simple navy dress, elegant and understated, something I had chosen specifically because it would not draw attention. I did not want to be accused of trying to upstage the bride-to-be. I took a deep breath, put on my family face, the mask of calm, pleasant neutrality, and walked toward the garden entrance. My mother intercepted me before I even reached the patio. She looked frantic, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection, her gold sequined gown sparkling under the lights. She grabbed my arm and said it was a disaster. I asked what was wrong. She said the caterer had put out cream napkins, but Evelyn had specifically asked for ivory, and the cream clashed with the tablecloths. She told me I had to fix it. I gently said I did not think anyone would notice the difference between cream and ivory. My mother looked at me like I had suggested burning down the estate. She said Evelyn would notice, then pushed me toward the service tent and told me to swap them before people started eating. So within 2 minutes of arriving, I was working. I found the ivory napkins and went from table to table replacing the cream ones, clutching a bundle of cloth to my chest. I felt ridiculous. I was a 32-year-old woman. I was a judge, and I was rushing around a garden fixing a napkin emergency that existed only in my mother's head. Guests began filtering in. These were not just family friends. These were Daniel's people. Daniel came from money. Old money. Serious money. His family owned half the real estate in the city. His friends were lawyers, doctors, politicians, developers, and business tycoons. As I moved through the crowd, collecting empty glasses and straightening chairs, I caught pieces of conversation. They were talking about the market landmark legal cases, city zoning laws, property rights, and municipal disputes. I wanted to join in. I overheard one man discussing a recent ruling on property boundaries, a ruling I had actually written a dissenting opinion on months earlier. I wanted to stop and explain the precedent. I wanted to say that the reasoning came from State versus Miller and that they were missing the key point. But I could not. I was holding a stack of dirty napkins. Then Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked stunning. I have to give her that. Evelyn knew how to make an entrance. She paused just long enough for everyone to turn toward her, then descended with Daniel on her arm, beaming as if the entire evening had been arranged by the universe for that one perfect image. She floated through the crowd, accepting compliments and flashing her ring. Eventually, she made her way to the group near me. I tried to fade backward, but she spotted me. She called my name and pulled me forward. She introduced me as her little sister, Ruby. The group smiled politely. Evelyn told them I was such a help practically running the party behind the scenes, and that I worked in admin, so I was obsessed with details. A woman in pearls asked where I worked. Evelyn answered for me. She said I worked at the courthouse, keeping the place from falling apart with files, phones, and schedules. Then she added that someone had to do the grunt work so the lawyers could be brilliant. She laughed, that light, tinkling laugh people always mistook for charm. The group laughed with her. The woman in pearls said it was good to have a job. Evelyn said they were very proud of me because I was so steady. I stood there with my smile frozen in place. My hands were clasped behind my back so they would not see my fists clenching. I mumbled that it was nice to meet them. Evelyn patted my cheek and told me to check on the bar because she thought they were running low on ice. I turned and walked away, heat crawling up my neck. It was humiliating. Not because of administrative work. There is no shame in administrative work. It is vital work. It keeps institutions alive. What hurt was the way she said it, the dismissal, the implication that I was less than everyone else, the way she used me as a prop to make herself look more successful by comparison. I went to the bar, but I did not get ice. I just stood there and breathed, counting slowly to 10. 1, 2, 3. Then I heard someone ask if I was okay. I turned and saw Daniel. I had not spent much time with him. He and Evelyn had a whirlwind romance, and I had met him maybe 3 times in passing. He was handsome, quiet, and seemed decent enough. I told him I was fine and that I was just checking supplies. He looked at me carefully. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, but he was not drinking it. Then he said I looked familiar. He said he knew we had met at family dinners, but I looked familiar from somewhere else. He asked if he had seen me downtown. My heart skipped. I said I worked downtown. He nodded and said, "Right, the admin job." But he said it slowly, like he was testing the word and finding that it did not quite fit. He said Evelyn had told him I handled filing. I told him it was something like that. He studied the way I stood, the directness of my gaze, the absence of nervous fidgeting. Then he said I did not seem like an admin. It was not an insult, it was an observation. I said, people surprise you. He agreed. Before he could ask anything else, Evelyn swept in and grabbed his hand. She told him the photographer wanted a picture of them by the fountain. She did not look at me, but she told me to make sure the trash was cleared from the cocktail tables because it looked messy. She pulled Daniel away. As he walked off, he looked back over his shoulder at me. He looked confused, like he was trying to place a puzzle piece that did not fit. The sun began to set. The string lights flickered on. The atmosphere shifted from afternoon mingling into evening elegance. The speeches were about to begin. I found a spot near the back by a large potted fern. It was my usual kind of spot, out of the way, visible enough not to seem rude, invisible enough to feel safe. I watched my parents laughing with Daniel's parents. I watched Evelyn holding court in the center of the room. It was a perfect stage, and everyone was playing their roles beautifully. I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a television show I used to love but had outgrown. I did not belong there. I did not belong in that box anymore. I checked my phone and saw an email from the court clerk about a docket change for Monday. I read it, and the legal language calmed me. Motion to dismiss. Sustained. Objection. Real words. Powerful words. I put the phone away and looked up as Evelyn tapped a spoon against her champagne glass. The sound rang out sharp and clear. She called for everyone's attention. The crowd hushed. The music stopped. All eyes turned to the golden couple. My stomach tightened. I hated toasts because that was usually when the Ruby jokes happened. It was an easy laugh, contrasting the glamorous, successful sister with the boring one. I braced myself. I prepared to smile. I prepared to be the punchline one last time. The air was still. The only sounds were the river in the distance and the soft clinking of glasses. Evelyn stood on a slightly raised platform with the microphone in one hand and Daniel's hand in the other. She looked radiant. She loved silence when it belonged to her. She loved the feeling of a crowd waiting for her to speak. She thanked everyone for coming and said it meant the world to her and Daniel. She said the night was about love, family, and the future. The guests murmured warmly. She told the story of how she and Daniel met, a polished version of the truth, edited for maximum romance. She made herself sound witty and charming. She made Daniel sound like a prince who had been waiting his whole life for her. Then she turned to family. She thanked my parents and blew them a kiss. She said they had made her who she was, had taught her to dream big, had taught her she could be anything she wanted. My parents beamed. My mother dabbed at her eye with a tissue. Then Evelyn's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me by the fern. I knew what was coming. She said she also had to thank her little sister Ruby. She called me the rock of the family, so grounded while she was out chasing big contracts and Daniel was closing deals. She said I was the one making sure the world kept turning because someone had to answer the phones. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It was not malicious for most of them. They thought it was gentle sibling teasing. But I knew the edge of it. Evelyn continued, encouraged by the reaction. She said she had been stressing about a venue the other day, and I had just looked at her with my blank face. Then she did an impression of me, slack-jawed and dull-eyed. The crowd laughed harder. She joked that it must be nice to have a job where I did not have to think too hard. Some people argued the cases, she said, and some people just stamped the papers. Then she pointed at me and said, "Right, Ruby." She expected me to nod, smile, and play along. I stood still. My hands were folded in front of me. A cold calm washed over me. The same calm I felt when a lawyer tried to lie in my courtroom. It was the calm of absolute clarity. I did not nod. I did not smile. I just looked at her. The silence stretched. It became awkward. The laughter died down. People shifted in their shoes. Evelyn's smile faltered. She was not used to me refusing to play my part. She quickly told everyone I was shy and joked that administrative work made a person shy. Then she turned toward Daniel, searching for him to join in and save the joke. But Daniel was not looking at the crowd. He was not looking at Evelyn. He was staring at me. His face had gone pale. The blood had drained from his cheeks. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He stepped forward, pulling his hand away from Evelyn's. He took the microphone from her, or maybe he simply spoke loudly enough that he did not need it. Evelyn whispered his name and asked what he was doing, but he ignored her. He walked to the edge of the platform, squinting at me through the dim light. Then he said my name in a serious voice. It was not the voice of a future brother-in-law making a toast. It was the voice of a man asking a question under oath. He asked exactly what I did at the courthouse. The question hung in the air. My mother stood quickly and told him not to embarrass me, saying I was a clerk who helped with filing. Daniel cut her off without taking his eyes from me. He said he did not think that was true. He took another step closer. The guests were confused now. The tension grew thick enough to touch. Daniel said he had been in court the previous year for the big zoning case, City versus Holloway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that case. I had presided over it. It was a contentious land dispute, and Daniel had been a witness for the defense. He had testified for 10 minutes. I had been wearing glasses, my hair pulled tight, my black robe swallowing my figure. I had sat high on the bench while he sat low in the witness box. Daniel said he had testified before a judge who was tough, brilliant, and had torn the defense apart on a technicality involving survey lines. He looked at Evelyn, then back at me. He said the judge's name had been Judge Cole. Then he looked straight into my eyes and said my last name was Cole. I said yes, it was. He said I worked at the courthouse. I said yes. He said I did not answer phones. It was no longer a question. It was a realization crashing down on him. I said no. Evelyn snapped at him, demanding to know what he was talking about. She said I was an admin and told him to stop being weird. Daniel turned to her and looked at her like she was suddenly a stranger. He said her sister was not a secretary. Then he turned back to me. The entire party was listening. You could have heard a pin drop in the grass. Daniel said, "You are the judge. You are Judge Ruby Cole." I looked at my parents. My mother's mouth was open. My father was frowning, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. I looked at Evelyn. She looked furious, confused, and suddenly very small. Then I looked at Daniel and said yes. I said I was. The words rang out. 2 simple words. Everything froze. It was as if I had dropped a bomb in the middle of the garden. The small box I had lived in for 30 years did not merely open. It shattered. The silence that followed was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of shock. For the first time in my life, I was not the one looking down at my shoes. I was the one looking back. The word yes is usually simple. It is small and common. But in that garden under those string lights, my yes weighed 1,000 pounds. I did not yell. I spoke with the same quiet authority I used when overruling an objection. It was a flat, factual statement. The reaction was physical. I saw it ripple through the crowd like a wave. First came the silence, heavy and suffocating, the kind that happens when a glass vase slips from a table but is not yet shattered. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. I looked at my mother. Her face was pure confusion. Her mouth was slightly open, her bright lipstick sharp against her pale skin. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a blurry image. She looked from me to Daniel, then back to me. I could see the gears turning. She was trying to reconcile the daughter she knew, the one she sent to fetch napkins, the one she interrupted at dinner, with the woman Daniel was describing. The math did not work for her. It was like watching a computer crash. My father reacted differently. He lowered his fork slowly to his plate, and the clink sounded like a gunshot in the quiet garden. His hand trembled. He gripped the edge of the table and looked at me with a mixture of fear and suspicion. My father prided himself on knowing everything. He liked being the head of the household, the man with answers. The idea that his quiet admin daughter had achieved a position of high power right under his nose, without his help, without his advice, and without his permission, shook him to his core. He looked betrayed. Evelyn did not look scared at first. She looked annoyed. She let out a short, brittle laugh and told Daniel to stop swatting his arm as if he were making a drunken mistake. She said he had too much scotch and was confusing me with someone else because I was just Ruby. Then she turned to the crowd with her bright, stage-managed smile and apologized, saying Daniel was terrible with faces and had probably seen someone who looked like me on the news. She tried to pull the microphone back. She tried to restart the script. She wanted to return to 5 minutes earlier, when she was the princess and I was the prop. But Daniel did not move. He did not smile back. He pulled his arm away from her and said he was not confused. His voice was cold. He said he had stood in front of me for 3 hours, had been cross-examined in my court, and knew my voice and my eyes. He pointed toward me and said Judge Cole had denied the motion to dismiss in the Holloway case and written a 20-page opinion on municipal zoning laws that was currently being cited in 3 other counties. He said his lawyers were terrified of me. The guests gasped. A murmur spread through the crowd. These were wealthy, connected people. They knew what that meant. They understood the power of a superior court judge. A man in a tuxedo near the front, one of Daniel's business partners, stepped forward and squinted at me. He said my name slowly, then turned to his wife and asked if I was the judge who had presided over the merger lawsuit last spring, the one who sanctioned the bank for hiding evidence. His wife's eyes widened. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. She no longer saw the admin girl. She saw my posture, my stillness, the intelligence in my eyes that she had ignored only minutes before. She whispered that it was me. The whispers grew louder. She is a judge. But Evelyn said she was a secretary. Why would they lie? Does the family not know? The shame shifted. For 30 years, the shame had been mine. It sat on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I had been the disappointment, the one who did not measure up, the one everyone overlooked. But in that second, the shame lifted from me, moved through the air and landed squarely on my family. My mother's face shifted from confusion to horror. She realized what was happening. She realized she had spent the last hour treating a superior court judge like a servant. She realized she had sent me to fetch napkins while bragging about Evelyn's tenacity. She realized every wealthy, important person she had been trying to impress was now looking at her with judgment. Evelyn realized it too. Her smile vanished and her face twisted into something ugly. She snapped at me, demanding to know what was going on and why people were calling me that. She told me to make them stop. It was pure habit. Ruby, get the ice. Ruby, fix the dress. Ruby, tell them to stop. I looked at my sister and saw her clearly. I saw the fear behind her eyes. She was not angry because I was a judge. She was angry because I had stepped out of my role. I had broken the contract. I was supposed to be the audience, not the main event. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. I told Evelyn I could not make them stop because it was the truth. She hissed that I was lying, forgetting the microphone was still near her. Her voice boomed over the speakers, shrill and desperate. She said I worked in the filing office, that I had told them it was stable, that I had told them it was boring. I corrected her. I said I had told them I worked at the courthouse. I had told them I worked in justice. They had filled in the rest. They had decided I was an admin. They had decided I was boring. I had simply let them. My father stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. He demanded to know why I would hide this, why I would lie to my own family. I told him I had not hidden it. I had simply stopped trying to make them listen. I looked around the garden and saw that the guests were no longer laughing at me. They were looking at me with respect. Some were even nodding. Daniel looked at me and softly called me Judge Cole. He apologized and said he had no idea when Evelyn introduced me. He admitted he had assumed what he had been told. Then he trailed off, looking at Evelyn with disgust. He told her she had mocked me. He said she had stood there and mocked a woman who had more power in the city than all of them combined. Evelyn went pale. She insisted she had only been joking, that it was our dynamic, that I liked it, that I knew she was kidding. Then she turned to me with pleading eyes and told me to tell him it was just a joke, to tell him we were fine. She wanted me to fix it. She wanted me to clean up the mess the way I had cleaned up the napkins. She wanted me to smooth things over so she could have her perfect engagement party back. I looked at her. I loved her in a complicated, painful way. She was my sister. But I could not fix this. The truth is permanent once it comes out. You cannot put it back in the box. I shook my head slowly and told her I was not the admin and I was not the joke. Not anymore. The structure of my family had always been like a house built on a fault line. From the outside, it looked solid, but deep down, it depended on a fragile balance. I was the bedrock that stayed still so Evelyn could build her towers. When I said not anymore, the earth moved. The house collapsed. Evelyn stared at me, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. She was not used to being told no, especially by me. In her world, she was the sun, and I was a distant, cold planet. She called me selfish. The guests flinched. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. I repeated it back to her calmly. She shouted that yes, I was selfish. She gestured at the flowers, the lights, the stunned guests, and said it was her night, her engagement, and I had to make it about me. She accused me of bringing my secret little victory and throwing it in her face. I pointed out that I had not said anything. Daniel had asked. She was the one who brought me forward. She was the one who made the joke about me answering phones. She had handed me the microphone whether she meant to or not. Evelyn screamed that I had let her look stupid. Tears were gathering in her eyes, but they were angry tears. She said I had let her stand there and brag about herself while I was secretly laughing at her, that I had set her up. I told her I had not been laughing at her. I had just been standing there being Ruby, the Ruby she had created. Daniel stepped between us. He turned his back on Evelyn, cutting her off from the crowd, and looked at my parents. He asked if they knew. My father looked trapped. He loosened his tie, sweat gathering at his neck, and said they knew I worked at the courthouse, but did not know the specifics. Daniel repeated the word specifics, like he could not believe it. He said being a judge was not a minor detail. It was a career. It was a life. He asked how they could not know their own daughter was a judge. My mother wailed that I never talked that I came to dinner and sat there like a mute, that I never told them anything, that I had deceived them. Daniel's voice rose. He asked if I had deceived them, then said he had been to their house for Sunday dinner for 6 months and had watched how they treated me. He said they interrupted me, talked over me, and sent me to the kitchen to fetch salt while they praised Evelyn for picking a color of blue. Then he looked around at his family and friends and said they had all laughed too. Evelyn made a joke, and everyone laughed. They laughed at a woman because they thought she was small. They thought she was just an admin. He looked back at me and apologized again. He said he had laughed before too, and had not asked either. I told him it was okay, but he insisted it was not. He said I deserved better. Evelyn gasped and grabbed his arm, demanding to know whose side he was on, because I was ruining their party. Daniel pulled his arm away again, and this time the gesture felt final. He looked at Evelyn, and the adoration I had always seen in his eyes was gone. In its place was cold clarity. He told her I had not ruined the party. She had. She had brought me up there to mock me. She had needed to make me look small so she could feel big. And now that she knew I was big, she could not handle it. Evelyn froze. It was the truth, spoken by the one person she needed to believe her illusion. The guests were shifting uncomfortably. The party was effectively over. The music had stopped long ago. People put down their glasses. They looked like intruders in a private family tragedy. I saw Aunt Susan whispering to her husband, looking at me with wide eyes, and then at my parents with pity. My parents had spent decades curating the image of a perfect, successful family. In 5 minutes, everyone saw the rot underneath. They saw the neglect. They saw the cruelty. My father stood and tried to regain control. He walked toward me with his stern face and used the deep father voice that had made me shrink when I was younger. He said things had gone far enough that I had embarrassed my sister and my mother, and he wanted me to apologize. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had ignored my report cards, forgotten my graduation, and never once asked whether I was happy. I realized with a sudden jolt of freedom that I was not afraid of him anymore. He was just a man, an old, insecure man, terrified of losing control. I said no. He blinked and asked me to repeat myself. I said no again. I would not apologize. I had done nothing wrong. I had worked hard, studied, built a career, and become a judge. Those were good things. Those were things a parent should be proud of. I gestured toward the crowd and said the only reason it was embarrassing for him was that he had never bothered to notice. My father's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He had no script for this. He had no line for a daughter who fought back. I said I thought I should go. I did not wait for permission. I turned around. Evelyn called after me, her voice cracking, saying I could not just leave because they had not cut the cake. I stopped and looked back at her. She looked ridiculous in her expensive white dress, standing in the wreckage of her own ego. I told her to enjoy the cake because I was sure it was delicious. Then I walked down the patio steps. The crowd parted for me. They did not step aside like I was a servant carrying a tray. They stepped aside like I was royalty. They made a wide path. One man murmured, "Good evening, Your Honor," as I passed. I nodded and wished him a good evening. I walked through the garden, past the fountain, past the string lights, all the way to my car. My heart was pounding in my chest, fast and rhythmic. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I got into the driver's seat and shut the door. The silence inside the car was beautiful. It was my silence. I gripped the steering wheel and looked back at the estate. I could see my family's silhouettes on the patio arguing. I could see Daniel walking away from Evelyn. I could see my mother crying. It was chaos, and for the first time in my life, it was not my job to fix it. I started the engine, put the car in gear, and drove away. The next morning, I woke early. Sunlight streamed through the blinds of my apartment. For a second, I forgot everything. I lay there in the quiet, feeling the softness of the sheets and listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Then it all came rushing back. The party, the microphone, Daniel's face, the word judge. I sat up and realized I felt lighter, physically lighter, as if 50 pounds of dead weight had disappeared during the night. I walked to the kitchen, made coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, and stood by the window watching the city wake up. It was Sunday. Usually Sunday meant anxiety. It meant preparing for dinner at my parents' house. It meant bracing myself for comments, chores, interruptions, and invisibility. But that morning, I knew I was not going. I finally looked at my phone. I had left it on the counter the night before, and the notification light was blinking frantically. I picked it up. 47 missed calls. 82 new messages. The numbers were staggering. My mother had called 12 times. My father had called 8. Evelyn had called 20. Aunt Susan, Uncle Bob, Lily, and relatives I barely spoke to had all called or texted. I opened the messages. My mother demanded that I answer the phone because we needed to talk. Then she asked how I could do this to them because Evelyn was hysterical. Then she said my father was very upset. Then she said Aunt Susan had seen me in the newspaper last month and wanted to know why I had not told them, because they looked like fools. Then she begged me to call because we were family. The tone moved from anger to victimization to desperation. Evelyn's messages were worse. She said I had ruined her life. She said Daniel had left early and would not talk to her. She asked if I was happy that I had finally gotten my attention. Then she said she was sorry, but only if I would call Daniel and tell him it was a misunderstanding. She still did not understand. She thought it was a trick. She thought I could fix the fact that I was a judge. Then there were texts from relatives I had not heard from in years. Uncle Bob said he had heard the news and was proud that we should catch up soon. Cousin Mike sent a message saying the news was crazy and congratulating me, then asked if I could help with a parking ticket. I deleted his text without replying. I listened to one voicemail from my father. He sounded uncomfortable. He said they had been surprised and that it was a shock. He said I had to understand that I had always been quiet and they had not known I had this in me. Then his tone changed. He said they wanted to celebrate. They wanted to throw a dinner for me. A judge in the family was a big deal. I laughed out loud, but there was no humor in it. Now they wanted to celebrate. Now that I was a trophy. Now that I was something they could brag about at the country club. My daughter, the judge. They did not care about the work. They did not care about the justice. They cared about the status. They wanted to steal my light the way they had stolen everything else. I did not reply. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. My stomach tightened. For a moment, I thought it might be my mother coming to drag me back into the fold. I looked through the peephole. It was Daniel. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes from the night before, rumpled and unbuttoned. He looked exhausted. I opened the door. He said hello awkwardly. I said hello back. He asked if he could come in for just a minute. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into my living room and looked around. My apartment was simple. Bookshelves filled with legal texts, novels, and history books. A comfortable gray couch. No gold statues. No white furniture. No performance. Just a real lived-in space. He said it was nice and quiet. I told him I liked quiet. Then he turned to me and said he wanted to apologize again for everything, for not knowing. I told him he did not have to come. He said he did. Then he told me he had ended it. I looked at him surprised and asked if he meant the engagement. He nodded and rubbed his face with both hands. He said he had sat there the night before, watching Evelyn, watching how she treated me, watching how she treated her parents, and realized he did not know her. He said he had fallen in love with the performance with the star, but the person underneath was cruel and deeply insecure, and she covered it by hurting people. He looked at me and said he realized he had been part of it, that he had sat at the table and allowed it because it was easy and because he wanted to be part of a perfect family. But when I stood up, he saw what real strength looked like, and it made Evelyn look hollow. Instinctively, I defended her. I said she was my sister and not a monster, that she had been taught she had to be the best to be loved. Daniel said maybe, but he could not marry a woman who treated her sister like a servant. He said he could not unsee it. He took a long breath and told me I was remarkable. He called me Judge Cole and said he hoped my family figured that out. I thanked him. Then he left. I closed the door and leaned against it. My family was falling apart. The wedding was off. My parents were in a panic. Evelyn was devastated. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel guilty. I did not feel like I had to fix it. I realized it was not my fault. It was the inevitable result of the truth coming to light. You cannot build a foundation on lies and expect it to hold when the wind blows. I was the wind, and I was done being still. 3 days later, Evelyn came to my apartment. She did not call first. She simply showed up. When I opened the door, I almost did not recognize her. She was not wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun. She wore sweatpants and a baggy t-shirt. In 32 years, I had never seen my sister look like that. She looked normal. She looked human. She stood in the hallway, clutching her purse, smaller than I had ever seen her, and asked if she could come in. Her voice was small and raspy from crying. I stepped aside. She walked in without looking around and went straight to the couch, curling her legs beneath her. I went to the kitchen and brought her a glass of water. Then I sat in the armchair opposite her. We sat in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, she said Daniel was gone. He had packed his things and moved out. I told her I was sorry, and I meant it. I knew she loved him in her own way. She said he had told her he did not respect her, that he said she was a bully. Then she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes and asked if she was a bully. It was the first honest question she had ever asked me. I looked at her. I could have lied. I could have smoothed it over and said she was just spirited or dramatic. But I respected her too much to lie now. I said yes, softly. Sometimes she was. She flinched. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She asked why I had not stopped her, why I had let her treat me that way for years, why I had fetched drinks, why I had let her call me admin if I was a judge, why I had let her make me look small. I told her the truth, because it was easier, because I thought it made her happy, because I thought if I stayed small, she could be big, and if she was big, Mom and Dad would be happy. I told her I had been trying to keep the peace. She whispered that I had not been keeping the peace. I had been letting her become a monster. She wiped her face with her sleeve and said she had always been jealous of me. I stared at her. Jealous of me? She was the star. She was the one everyone looked at. Evelyn said that was exactly why. She had to make them look. She had to perform. She had to be perfect every day, and it was exhausting. But I was steady. I could sit in a corner and read a book and be content. I did not need applause. I did not need them to tell me who I was. She hated that. She wanted to shake me. She wanted to make me feel as insecure as she felt. She looked at me with raw honesty and said that when Daniel asked what I did and I said I was a judge, she felt like she was shrinking. She felt like she was disappearing, because if I was successful without needing our parents' help, without shouting about it, without performing for it, then what did that make her? Just a loud girl in a pretty dress. I told her she was not just that. She was smart. She was talented. She had built a business. But she said she had done it for them. She had done it for applause. I had done mine for myself. That was the difference. That was why Daniel left. He saw I was real, and she was only a reflection. Then she put her head in her hands and sobbed. I moved from the chair to the couch and sat beside her. I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me and cried like a little girl. I held her. In that moment, even though I was younger, I felt like the big sister. I told her I had never been competing with her. I had never wanted to beat her. I had only wanted to be myself. She sobbed that she knew. We sat there for an hour. She cried until she had no tears left. When she finally sat up, she looked exhausted but calmer. The frantic energy was gone. The Evelyn performance was gone. She said she did not know what to do. Her engagement was over. Our parents were driving her crazy, asking how they could spin the situation to make the family look good. She said she wanted to run away. I told her to run away, to take a trip, to go somewhere no one knew her and figure out who she was when she was not Evelyn the star. She asked if that was what I did in the courtroom. I said yes. The law did not care about my family. It cared about the truth. It was the only place I could breathe. She nodded slowly. When she stood to leave, she apologized. She said she really was sorry. She said she did not know if she could change overnight and would probably still be selfish sometimes. But she saw me now. She promised she saw me. I told her that was all I had wanted. At the door, she paused and said, "Judge Cole sounded pretty cool." I smiled a real smile this time and told her it was pretty cool. Then she left. It was not a fairy tale ending. We did not braid each other's hair. Daniel did not come back. My parents did not suddenly become wise, warm people who understood everything. They were still confused and shallow in many ways, but something had shifted. The dynamic had broken, and in the cracks, something real was starting to grow. I am still a judge. I still wear the black robe. I still sit on the bench and make hard decisions every day. But my life outside the courtroom has changed. I stopped going to Sunday dinners every week. I told my parents I would come once a month on my terms. If they interrupted me, I would leave. The first time I actually stood up and walked out, they were stunned. The second time they listened. Now, when I speak, they stay quiet. They do not fully understand me. Maybe they never will. But they respect me. Or maybe they fear me a little. I have learned that is acceptable too. I still see Evelyn sometimes. She moved into a smaller apartment. She started seeing a therapist. We meet for coffee. Sometimes it is awkward, but it is honest. We are learning how to be sisters without the old roles. I learned a hard lesson that night in the garden. I learned that silence does not buy peace. It only buys invisibility. I thought that by staying small, I was protecting myself. I thought that if I did not challenge my family, they would love me. But they did not love me. They loved the convenient version of me. They loved the doormat. By hiding my success, I was not being humble. I was being complicit in my own erasure. I was helping them mistreat me. There are so many people like me. I see you. You are the quiet one at the table. You are the one who fixes the problems while everyone else takes the credit. You are the one who swallows your words because you are afraid of rocking the boat. You are the one with a whole universe inside you, with talents, dreams, achievements, and strength your family chooses to ignore because it does not fit their story. I am telling you this from the other side. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself just so they can feel bigger. You do not owe your parents your silence. You do not owe your siblings your submission. You do not owe the world a duller shine just because your brightness hurts someone else's eyes. If you have been hiding your growth, stop. If you have a secret identity you are proud of, put it on the table. Make them look at it. Maybe they will celebrate you. Maybe they will be jealous. Maybe, like my family, they will fall apart. Let them fall apart. The people who truly love you will want to know the real you. They will want to know the judge, not just the admin. They will want to know the artist, the writer, the singer, the CEO, the person you have become. Do not stay in the box. Break the lid. Stand up. Speak clearly. And if they ask who you think you are, tell them. Tell them exactly who you are. and do not apologize for it.